I am extremely devoted, committed, unapologetic about the D&I space. How do I move or remove that compartment? How do I make it so that they can, in a complementary way, continue to do what they are responsible for doing, as well as contributing to this organizational structure, organizational redesign, this needed to be a better human? How can I help facilitate that participation? How are we relying on the technology? Are we using it to influence the direction of our decision, the direction of our strategy, or are we using it to actually make the decision for the direction for the strategy? Is it an influence or is it a deciding factor? And I tend to believe that it should be a bit more of an influence and informing and not a decidere, the Latin word of decision. So if we can do that, I think that we are in a better position.
Torin, welcome to the show, buddy. Absolute pleasure to have you on.
You know, I'm ready for it. You have been gracious. The way that you greet me all the time when I come to London, your time in Nashville. Absolutely looking forward to our having a good conversation. Thank you.
Oh, man. And yeah, proper fanboy moment for me. I genuinely think when you spoke for the first time those years ago at RecFest, that was like a pivotal moment in the UK event scene, I think, in general, and one of the best speakers we've ever had for diversity, equality, inclusion, if not the best. And every person who I always send your way, and I think, you know, you've got to go and speak to Torin, you've got to go and see Torin speak, is never disappointed. And even this year at RecFest, our talks are on at the same time. And I regularly told people, don't attend mine, attend Torin's. And I knew that's when I had the headline slot because you put me on at the same time as you. It's there.
That was such a, you know, it was a funny post. And I said, you know, this dude is so genuine, pushing people from his stage over to my stage. And, you know, I don't take that lightly. I really, really appreciate that generosity, the interest that you have in the message, unselfishness. That's a true unselfish move. And Sam, I just want to say, while I smiled when I saw that LinkedIn post this past summer, I just want to say thank you for that. And I don't take that lightly, which is the reason why I'm here rocking with you on today.
Yeah, man. I'm looking forward to it. And I think, look, ultimately, you've got such a great message and it's such an important message right now. And in the context of the news and the media and everything that's happened this year with diversity, equality and inclusion and increasingly polarized society in places and in pockets, like it's our opportunity to stand up and talk and share the message of what's right and make sure we're pushing things forward still. So yeah, I really wanted to share that today. I think for anybody that hasn't been fortunate enough to come across you, your content, your business, like, yeah, introduction, who are you, what do you do, what are you most passionate about?
So in some ways, I'm one of the hardest working men in diversity and inclusion. Serve as an analyst, as a consultant. You said a moment ago, a speaker, and a burgeoning, if you will, because I'm trying to develop piece of HR tech that situates inside the business intelligence manager enablement space. And so I really find myself sometimes challenged and sometimes stretched a bit thin because I am extremely devoted, committed, unapologetic about the D&I space. Ultimately, it comes down to a very, very simple phrase for me, Sam. I want people to wrestle with what it means to be human. That, for me, is D&I. I want you to wrestle with what it means to be human, a better leader, coach, colleague, better friend, family member. I just want people to see D&I as more than just checking and or them versus us type of.
And it's proper inclusion, belonging in every sense of the word. It's like, you know, as a society. I love that framing. And I think that's part of your mission. I think that's part of what's really interesting in a context where it's very easy to just tag those three letters together in various orders and start to make assumptions as to what the goal is or what the ambition is and move away from box checking. So how do you see it in the context of what's happened in mainstream media over the past year or so in 2024? Like, yeah, what's your kind of commentary on it?
Actually, I want to take you all the way back. Then I want to go back to like September of 2019 when I was recording with my dear friend Julie Sowash. We used to do something called Crazy in the King. We knew, the two of us knew back then that we would have a problem when our president had made a statement around removing D&I training from federal spaces. We knew that it was going to reverberate in the corporate corridor. What we didn't know is how fast and how much force would be applied from political fractions. That's what I didn't know. That's what Julie didn't know. And so when you think about what's happening in 2023, what's happening in all of 2024, it has been a serious repossession. That is what we've seen. We saw a recognition where individuals and organizations showing their commitment to diversity and inclusion, or as you say, some arrangement of the letters, if you will. But since then, we've seen a number of leaders, political persons, religious figures, academic personas. We've seen a number of investors, activist investors. We've seen a number of individuals and organizations and entities repossess the progress that we've attempted to make. And what I say to that, Sam, is it's really disappointing and disingenuous. And the reason being, because if you are doing diversity and inclusion the right way, you are absolutely looking at strategies, systems, organizational redesign, process, protocol. You're looking at aspects of the business that make people stronger, that make aspects of the business that make teams, employees more engaged, or assist them in being more engaged, more productive, and remaining with your organization. When you are doing those three things, it is better for the stakeholder and the shareholder. So what I see right now is a disingenuous repossession, but it's going to require that voices like mine, yours, and millions of others say, you know what, wait a minute. This retreat is not necessary. We need to be moving back towards where we were a year and a half, last 2 years, last 3 years. That's the focus. That's the direction that we need to be moving in.
And the thing is, American foreign policy is so powerful when we think about the reverberations for the rest of the West and the reverberations for the rest of the world. And the UK very quickly followed suit with very similar narrative, very similar kind of discussions around it. Then that happens in public sector in terms of the focus that, transcends and moves through those corporate corridors, just like you're saying. And obviously we're now in an election year again in the US, and potentially another split moment, another, opportunity for that regression as opposed to progression. And not going to ask you to commentate on where you think that's going to go, because, where we're filming this now and where this will be released is probably going to be about the time when the election's going to be there. But I suppose tying the shareholders and the stakeholders together, I think is so important, because actually you're not just talking about box checking and diversity here. You're talking about business impact and making teams collaborate better, and you're talking about making humans interact with each other in a better way. So how could you summarize that in a way for listeners in terms of how you think about that practically for organizations, tying those two parts?
Wow. So stakeholders and shareholders kindly together. Let me see if I can do this in a way that is pretty concise. So the first thing that I would say is, number one, we need a declarative statement from the highest leader inside of the organization. That person must, at least at a minimum, internally share with employees why diversity and inclusion is good for the business. Second thing is that individual, that CEO, hopefully, is willing to reallocate resources, headcount, and dollars. What we saw was that a number of organizations went out and hired a chief diversity officer, or they put a program director in place to lead D&I efforts. But they necessarily or weren't always afforded the opportunity to have access to resources. In many instances, Sam, they were just placed in the position, sometimes as a figurehead, other times as a you go sit in the corner over there type responsibility. We need resources and headcount in place. And I want in place people that have the acumen and the experience to really marshal this effort forward. Third thing that I need is for that CEO to hold mid-level leaders accountable. And that's not a punitive or a negative statement. Holding people accountable is positive. We do it in sales. We do it in almost every other aspect of the business. People join a team. They have a responsibility. Goals, they have KPIs, they have objectives. Everyone is held accountable. So it should be no different that managers are held accountable to some degree of what are you doing to support the CEO's declarative statement around diversity and inclusion. So that's the first thing. Statement, allocation of resources or reallocation of resources and holding people accountable. On the individual side, what I want to see is people feeling empowered. Can I speak up in my organization because I see something that's not necessarily aligned with our core values, our mission? Something is off about our cultural edict. Something is missing. So I feel empowered enough to speak up to you, Sam. We got to do something to change this. I also, if I'm in a role where I have some degree of leadership or responsibility in building my team, strategically, I should be looking at where are we? Are we in hyper growth stage? Are we in transformation stage? Are we in continuous improvement? Are we in sustaining where we are? Where are we as a business unit, department, or team? Because where we are really, to me, dictates how we move in terms of recruitment, in terms of learning and development, in terms of how we do philanthropic efforts, how we show up in the community, our brand recognition. Notice what I'm doing. I'm just moving through the organization. All of these things look a little bit differently. Your recruiting message is different when you are in hyper growth versus transformation. Your employer branding messaging is different when you are in sustainability or you are looking at continuous improvement. If we are ebbing and flowing through where we actually are strategically, then I think that influences how we set apart our strategy for what it is that we are attempting to do. And then the last thing that I would say as an individual is your tactical execution. What am I going to do to live out this executive's declarative statement? As an individual, what role am I going to play to make sure that I move the meter of progress in the organization? And I think that is the thread that we are missing. We are not asking every single person in our organization, how is it that you are supporting this declarative statement from our executive? If we can do those three things from the leadership level and these three things from the individual level, you bring that together, you ultimately are marrying the business methodology with the social imperative to be that better human that I mentioned a moment ago.
I love that. And I also love that example as well. That was one of the examples when we were in Nashville together and we were at the R100 event and Chatham House Rules. So I won't mention the organization, but like dial into that a little bit. Like how can organizations get that individual buy-in? Because quite often when we're talking about big enterprise, which tends to be the audience of this podcast, it tends to be HR leaders from big global enterprise. And if you look at big global enterprise, by and large, they're going to have that declarative statement. Now, how true that is in terms of how it's rolled out into practice and how much energy there is behind it versus other organizations obviously differs. So yeah, what's that mechanism? Let's go into that. I'd love that example just to be shared. I know you shared it with one org, but I think everyone should hear that example because it was so simple to get that individual.
Absolutely. And I know that there's a lot of conversation these days around whether or not performance evaluations will continue to exist in an organization. But I'll use that phrase because it's one that is uniform across the globe. Everyone understands an annual performance review. There may be a different cadence in your organization, but everyone understands that there is a conversation that takes place between the employee and the person that they report to. And what I am suggesting is that we can get a cacophony of individuals, evangelists inside of the organizations. The more people that are doing something to support D&I, the stronger the organization is. And so what I'm saying is, as a person who performs that evaluation, you add one question to it. And that question is very simple. Sam, what did you do to support the CEO's declarative statement around D&I? That's it. It doesn't have to be a big conversation, but the response is going to be, I did this, I did not do anything, or I wanted to do something, but some variation of one of those three. I did this, I didn't do anything because I didn't care, or I would have loved to have done something, but unfortunately, I just didn't feel like I had the bandwidth, the acumen, the knowledge, the connective tissue. Something was missing. Wanted to, but I couldn't. And so as long as you understand where an individual is, I believe a leader, you then can show up and support that person a lot better. You can help them to develop that muscle. You can help them develop that connective tissue. You can help them identify those resources. As a leader, as long as you know where they are in their interest in supporting D&I, you can show up appropriately and model for them what it is that they are needing to be able to be better about that. Ask the one question. Whether you are in an organization of 100 people, 500 people, 5,000 people, 50,000 people, ask everyone that one question.
Yeah. And you're almost certain to get 100% completion rate. You can then break it down by region, by department, by manager, because, there's the other challenge, right? And this is the challenge. It's not just diversity, equality, inclusion. It's change management in general, right? You're working with really complex matrix organizations, sometimes with multiple brands that sit underneath them in multiple territories with regional differences and centers of excellence and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those big missions, those big objectives can get lost, or they can get replayed back without necessarily capturing the nuance within each area, within each region. And so I think this is a wonderful example of like how you can do something so simple to then be able to aggregate that data, interpret it, and press and probe and pull and think about what's different. And actually, you don't want to make your performance review too long, but actually there are other parts of your process. Is there other parts of your organization where you can capture information in that same way? Because quite often when you're thinking about surveys that go out to people for initiatives, the response rate's so low. But for something like that, that's generally tied to your salary, generally tied to whether you'll get a promotion or, a pay increase or et cetera, completion rate's going to be high. And that's what I love about it as well, right? You're going to get a very full picture.
And again, in that full picture, like you suggested, I get to analyze the data, the stratas of data, and I get to develop, well, how can we put programming in place in this particular geography? Or how is it that this business unit has an extremely high participation rate and this particular business unit does not? This particular department doesn't. What is it that is happening over in this unit? Is it a matter of allocation of resources? Is it the leadership, the managers that are in this particular unit versus this one? Is it because of the responsibility and the role that they play in the organization? We get to, as the person leading the D&I, I get to get a bit more nuanced, a bit more niche, a bit more granular in how I'm developing that strategy. Because here's the thing, Sam, I do not approach D&I as if people have an apprehension or a reservation to such. I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I don't think that people don't want to participate. I assume that they would like to participate, but there may be an impediment in the way. And so how is it, as the person marshaling this effort, how do I move or remove that impediment? How do I make it so that they can, in a complementary way, continue to do what they are responsible for doing, as well as contributing to this organizational structure, organizational redesign, this edict to be a better human? How can I help facilitate that participation? That's what I'm looking for in the data. I'm not looking in the data to be angry with individuals, to punish individuals. I'm looking to find ways to make that process of being a better human a part of our organizational DNA.
Yeah. And if you are underrepresented or marginalized group and retention is bad in a particular region, you're also being able to give that individual opportunity to surface that kind of information on a national, international level as well, where you're like aggregating and capturing that and getting that emotion and allowing people to open. But I think the other part, which is really interesting, it tying back to that stakeholder, shareholder value piece, you could start to make those correlations, right? Areas with high participation rates, X impact of revenue, areas of low participation rates, Y impact on revenue, thinking about retention, thinking about overall company engagement, buy into culture, like all of these things. And again, if you don't ask the question, just that one simple question, you're not going to get the answer. And it really captured it for me of like so much that you can get off just asking one question, which is often the root of things. Let me ask you one more question. So 2025, like if we were to crystal ball it, like what should people be focusing on? What should people be thinking about? Like the world is moving and changing and in some ways not in the right direction. We'll come to AI, I think, at the end, because that's going to naturally be a part of it. But generally thinking, overall rhetoric, like what can people do to drive humanity forward as you frame it and drive, I suppose, that collaboration, that fostering a culture inside an organization? Like what's on your roadmap for 2025? What are you going to be sharing with people?
Let me dart around a little bit. So one of the things that I absolutely continue to share is what's the one thing that you can do? I challenge individuals to always ask that question. What's the one thing that I can do differently in my organization? When I'm having discovery meetings with recruiters and we are looking at entering into a new community or new geography, when I'm talking to product managers about new services, new products that are going to be rolled out, when I'm looking at executives when they are thinking about succession planning and market movement, when I'm talking to people about policy and procedure, I always ask one question: who's missing from this conversation? You
Yeah.
all are smart. Not in any way suggesting that you are not, but who's missing from this conversation. And oftentimes the person missing, Sam, is or are the individuals that will be impacted most by the discussion that is happening. And so I'm always saying to myself, what's the one thing that I can do differently? And that one thing, more often than not, for me, is to challenge the clients, the audiences that I'm speaking with, clients that I'm working with, who's missing from the conversations. So that's one thing that I'll continue to put in 2025. The other thing that I think that we're going to focus heavily on is how are we using tools like AI tools and other technologies to reduce, to mitigate bias in organizations. The bottom line is it is present. It's present in how we pay people. It's present in how we promote people. It's present in how we publish information about our organization. How are we going to use these tools, these various tools that bring efficiency and efficacy, but how are we going to evaluate these tools so that we mitigate their implementing or enhancing bias in our system, in our structure, in our process, and our policy? I want to do a better job of evaluating that. And then I think the third thing that I'd like to do, if I could wave a magic wand, the third thing that I'd like to do is to see if I could get rid of hunger. I know you're saying, like, what in the world does that have to do with D&I? I just believe that we are the solution that we are looking for. And so I challenge myself, what am I doing locally here in Maryland to be better for those that don't have or less fortunate than I? What am I going to do this holiday season to feed more families than just my family? What am I going to do this holiday season to make sure that young people in the city that may be unhoused, may not have family members, what am I going to do to bring a bit of joy to them during the holiday season? And then beyond that, Sam, what am I going to do to put my money and my time and my attention where my mind is? My mind is always thinking about others, other people. What is it that they're experiencing? We got hurricanes that are coming through. We got tornadoes that are coming through. We got conflict in other parts of the country and the world. What is it that I can do to maybe make things a little bit better for them? So for me, it's more of the inclusion aspect of the DEIB. It's really about how can I include some of these other disparate populations, these unfortunate, these marginalized? How can I show up more to be supportive of some of the challenges that these individuals are facing? Because listen, Sam, I'm always standing on my platform, my soapbox, that we should be doing D&I. But then that projects to individuals, well, Torin, you are doing something about the challenges that others are experiencing. And so I am often placing myself under a microscope, a bit of scrutiny. Am I doing enough? And so I'm going to continue in 2025 to ask myself, are you doing enough to make a difference for others?
Yeah, and I love that because it's almost a direct correlation with that organizational example of you've got the declaration from the top and you're driving towards these goals and there's the big strategic initiatives, but then actually dialing it back down as an individual. And if we all do make that difference, right, we all make that donation, we all give to charity, we all give our time. When you are in a more fortunate position, the world is definitely a better place. But still, we need to take those individual actions, but actually the actions that organizations take have the biggest shifts. Actions that organizations take are the ones that can stop the systemic kind of issues that we've got, and the acts that governments take and other powerful organizations then impact conflict and some of those bigger geopolitical issues, which, you know, as an individual, you you can't necessarily in many instances, but you can take individual action along the way to do it. And you can keep sharing the message. You can keep raising your voice and making sure that, these things are heard. And that's what this is about. And I think, I love that individual example of like, what can you do as a person, and not just, the festive season is a great time to do it. But like you say, throughout 2025, how do you ongoing, impact communities, impact people, show up? And I love that phrase of like, show up. The other part which comes with this, and, we've seen in the last week or so, driverless vehicles, driverless taxis, bots, robotics. I think that, this is the next wave of like AI plus robotics. So far, AI has been an impact on knowledge-based workers, right? It's been impacting people that if you can ingest a lot of information and provide back an answer, that was previously a job that required a lot of training and development in order to be able to relate that. That's obviously shortened the cycle significantly. Now add robotics plus AI, all of a sudden it feels a lot more like previous revolutions, which are focused on hand-based work. And there's going to be big societal shifts there. So, I mean, I don't know, we could go for hours on that subject and riffing on where it's going. But I think that's another area we've all got responsibility, right? To make sure that, we're not just moving into this path of automation, and that there are opportunities for people beyond that. So I don't know, let's take AI in two fronts, right? One, tool selection, making sure that's right. How can we ensure there's an opportunity to like de-rank bias and use technology to alleviate versus the risks that can come within it? And then second part, robotics plus AI, challenges that's going to throw on a global, international level. There'll definitely be new jobs created, but there'll certainly be some lost. So let's start with AI tools, recruitment bias. What's your thinking?
Yeah, so I think it really comes down to the composition of the team of individuals that are evaluating these tools. Naturally, there needs to be some degree of ethics. I'd love to see this third-party partisan entity that is what's the word that I'm looking for? Is they have the autonomy to come in and evaluate and give a stamp of approval of these various technologies that are entering into the marketplace. Listen, they are funded. I don't know how they're funded, but I think that we are at a point where we are going to be looking for someone else to say, your tool is a good tool, or your tool is moving in the right direction. Very much so like we rate restaurants in major cities, the way that we rate organizations in terms of their credit standing in the globe, across the globe, the way that we rate and evaluate the blue checks on social platforms. I believe that we are in need at this point of an independent body that can evaluate these various tools, because we've seen the legislation, we've seen the leaning towards organizations being responsible for the outcome of using a tool. And oftentimes the organizations are purchasing, making the investment based on the information given to them from the vendor. So I feel like we should have this independent auditing agency there. And I'd love to see that in 2025. But absent of that, I think that we should internally do a far better job of composition, evaluation, the composition of the evaluation team that's there. Not just the CTO, not just the CFO, but make sure we include some of our users, the people that are going to actually be using it. Maybe we include some of the people who are going to once again be impacted, evaluated. Let's find some of the candidates that are going to run through this particular system. Let's go out and tap some of the employees that have to engage or interface with this particular system. Let's look at colleagues who have to log in. I just think that we don't do a good, listen, I understand saying we can't have a room full of 60 people trying to make a decision on a tool. I get it, but we can certainly include a couple more voices. So I think from an evaluation composition standpoint, we stand to do a far better job in 2025 than we may have done over the last 5 to 7 to 10 years. I think the other thing that I think is extremely important, very, very important, is our reliance on this technology. I get it. It brings efficiency. It brings efficacy. But how are we relying on the technology? Are we using it to influence the direction of our decision, the direction of our strategy, or are we using it to actually make the decision for the direction, for the strategy? Is it an influence or is it a deciding factor? And I tend to believe that it should be a bit more of an influence and informing and not a decidere, the Latin word of decision. So if we can do that, I think that we are in a better position.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I think this is the thing, right? We're a vendor and we've got AI within our solution, but it's not the deciding factor, it's the influencing factor. And there's a lot of hesitance. There's a lot of, I think you start stitching those two letters together for some organizations at the moment, and their backs just go right up of like, we want to avoid any litigation because the onus has been put on employers in terms of owning the output, and they're judging on what's coming from the vendors. And they're probably not doing that work of understanding what is the difference between this and what's come before? Because, hey, check this out. Every time you Google search now, what's the first thing that comes up? Google Gemini. Are companies blocking Google search from within their companies? No, they're not. Employees are using it every single day, right? You're using your Microsoft suite. You've got AI within that. You're using LinkedIn. You've got AI within that. Everybody is using it every single day, knowingly or not knowingly. And that kind of, system of check, system of record is just not happening in those scenarios. So where's the balance? And I think that's what's so important. I think organizations need to be in a position where they're able to stay competitive, because there'll be some orgs that are able to adopt quickly, see the efficiency, see the impact, be able to drive their revenues up, impact, across the organization pretty significantly, versus organizations that are maybe a bit more steadfast and maybe not coming from such an educated position on where AI is. But AI is not new, right? What we're talking about here is large language models and generative AI that's really, supercharged over the last 2.5 years. And I think that's where that disconnect is. And you start to put those two letters together, and people are hesitant to change, where in fact they probably need to change to some extent. But then when they make that change, and I think you've absolutely nailed it there, it's not just about the composition of the CTO, the CFO, the head of engineering, etc. Users, because they're going to see the difference between whether they're using Google Gemini every day in their Google search, or whether they're using LinkedIn, or whether they're using X tool or Y tool. And what you'll probably discover as part of that process is within your tech stack right now, there's loads of tools that you've not gone through this process that have brought these features out, that have been turned on, that people are using every single day, that might not meet the way in which you're measuring it. So yeah, I think that composition is crucial. And I love that point on users. I think that user piece is so important. Final thought then, blending, this next phase, as I'm seeing it, of we've gone through multiple revolutions: industrial revolution, agrarian revolution. Most of them being centered on machinery that has taken the jobs of people with hands, going out and doing hand-based work. And I call it hand-based work. Obviously, it can be any variant. It's your physical power, or, a person needs to be situated. And where that's now potentially in jeopardy, where do you see your role as a commentator, your role as a person within the community? How do you see, I suppose, humanity making sure that there's opportunity for people? Where do you see that balance? It's a hard question.
Well, actually, I smile because I used to spend some time on SiriusXM reaching a couple million listeners every single week. And one of the things that I talked about probably in 2017, no, maybe in 2018, 19, something like that, was a robot that could build a 3D house. It could literally drop the cement and build the house for you. But as model or visual behind me, I have walls that not complete as of yet. I have light fixtures that are in, but the treatment to those light fixtures have not been installed as of yet. I have light switches on the various walls in my office right now that don't have the face covers. I don't have the flooring in my office. And so when I think about AI and how far yet we have to go, robotics, how far yet we have to go, there are certainly some nuance that AI and robots just don't necessarily address. And they won't address in our everyday work. And so I'm really not concerned with whether or not either of those technologies or those solutions replace individuals. What I think will happen is that we'll just continue to evolve. AI is going to continue to get smarter. Robots are going to become better, but there will always be the place for the individual that brings empathy, that brings nuance, that brings agility, They bring something special to the equation. You and I, when we were preparing to record this particular episode, we went through 3 to 5 minutes of trying to get our microphones exactly right, our sound exactly right. And it may not be 100% in this particular moment, but I don't believe is smart enough to recognize that there was a bit of an echo or a reverberation, if you will. AI wasn't smart enough to say, let's hold off, let's log out, let's log back in so that we can make sure that the recording is exactly the way that we want it to be. And so I am one of those individuals who's fond of AI, robotics, and the evolution of both of those technologies, but I also understand the importance that we play in staying in position. And what I want is for all of our listeners, no matter their capacity, find a way you stay in position, whether that requires upskilling, whether that requires reskilling, if it forces you to challenge your learning and development leader or the C-suite of your organization. You got to put some more resources in here, or we need to start looking at different types of events. Here are the associations that we belong to. These associations no longer serve where we are going. We got to find some new associations, some new conferences, some new events that we need to go to. They may be a bit more expensive, but you have to be an individual in the organization that brings solution to the problem. See, we got enough people that talk about the problem, but they don't have a solution. Be a person who brings value to the conversation. So bring some solution to the information, to the problems that you're going to present. I'm a fan. I'm excited about the direction of our technical advancement and what it can do for us in terms of pay equity, what it can do for us in terms of personalization around benefits and healthcare, what it can do for us in terms of repositioning our families and community. I'm an absolute fan of the technology. I just think that we need to be responsible about such.
Yeah, and I think on so many of those points, we often spend time thinking about the dangers, the challenges. We don't spend as much time celebrating. It's the same thing with all news, right? Bad news, it sells papers, right? Or papers or views on the internet, right? Whatever the setup is. And that's just so true. And what we don't spend a lot of time on is like all the positive benefits and everything that comes out of it. And a bit of a trick in a way, like in terms of the way I was framing it, because I think Hung Lee said it brilliantly about 9 or 10 months ago to me. And he said it's like that desire for the artisanal effect, right? If you are a consumer, the consumer still is a human being. And that artisanal effect of the croissant that you're willing to pay $2 for versus the croissant that's 30 cents. Well, this one's handmade. It's slightly imperfect. It's got that love. It's got that care that's gone into it. It's got a different flavor every day when you go there. Like it's going to be similar, but it's like unique versus something that's in a packet. There's 12 of them and they're just churned out on mass, right? It's two very different experiences. And I think that's a great analogy. And I think it kind of touches on what you touched on there of like, you know, how can you bring that human element into the conversation? How can you keep relevant? But it's definitely that adoption, augmentation, etc. But I just thought an interesting pose to challenge when you're thinking about that societal play, right? And actually what it should do from a societal play is thinking about, you know, those big data sets, that public information that was probably big projects and big spends to get to the answer for rehoming people or for medical care or for access to opportunity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We should have much greater visibility on that now with the advent of technology than we had before. And, you know, the people working upon that, that's a whole new industry, right? So yeah, tons there. And obviously we could go on for days, hours, weeks, months on this subject. I think just to wrap things up, and I suppose for you, as I said right at the beginning, you know, one of the greatest speakers that I've come across, your message is always super clear and empowering. Then people always leave the room with such emotion and charged and ready to go and take action and drive that progress. And sometimes it's those simple, you know, one questions. Sometimes it's bigger projects. So where can people find out more about you? Where can people connect with Torin? Like what's happening? Yeah. Where can they find out more and connect with you from here?
So again, Sam, I want to just say thank you. I appreciate you giving me some time to chat with the audience that you are curating. Wishing you the absolute best as we close out the rest of this year and approach a brand new year. I'm hoping people will listen to this episode and ask themselves the one very pressing question: what might I do differently? What might I do differently? One of the things that I say to people, Sam, is that what is needed is a shift in openness and value given to the narrative by both the storyteller and the listener. So as you listen to stories of this, I need you to just shift how you receive it through your ear gate, how you internalize the things that I am sharing with you, and then how you go out and upon that. We will all do it a little bit differently, but we all need a shift in openness and value given to the subject of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Where can they find me? Across all of social media, Torin Ellis, and on my personal website or professional website, TorinEllis.com. Again, Torin Ellis.
Absolute pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, and I'll see you soon.